Learning is gonna be in the doing, the
Mhm.
trying, and you're gonna be changed and others are gonna be changed, even if you don't quote unquote win.
Welcome to the Craft of Campaigns. I'm your host, Andrew Willis Garces. In this podcast, we go behind the headlines and hashtags, inviting movement storytellers to share lessons from social justice campaigns. Campaigns are a series of collective actions focused on winning a concrete demand beyond one-off mobilizations or election cycles. They have villains and heroes, teams that make plans to win, and activate people on the sidelines. In each episode, we explore one campaign through first-hand interviews for key lessons, principles, and practices for organizers today. Today, we're going to hear about an organization and a campaign that have profoundly influenced me as an organizer. About 6 years ago, I founded a grassroots Latina base building group here in North Carolina, Siembra NC, which did a lot of things that other Latina groups weren't doing at the time. That helped us build a base and change the conditions for our communities. Our undocumented members raised and distributed tens of thousands of dollars in solidarity funds to families who had experienced ICE detentions. We quickly piloted campaigns when we spotted possible openings, as when we partnered with Black organizers to challenge Democratic sheriffs to change their policies. And we eventually built a power building muscle, having thousands of conversations with Latina voters to get them to support pro Black, pro immigrant candidates. And we made sure to infuse our work with celebrations of Latina culture that were often queer and pro feminist and culturally working class. Probably no organization had as much influence on our choices as organizers for how to wage campaigns, for how to organize differently on new political terrain, and how to integrate a spirit of playful and risk taking experimentation into our tactics than Song, Southerners on New Ground. Song is a multiracial queer base building and campaigning group that has been around for over 25 years. And watching them grow and build and take on issues that touched all of our lives in the Southeast, not just those of queer people, has been transformative. Today, they're perhaps best known for kicking off the Black Mamas bailouts tactic, which has actually gone international, inspiring work to abolish bail across the country. Today, we'll hear the story of how it came into being. And this particular story has a bunch of twists and turns, unlike others this season, which are more straightforward, moving from point A to point B over time. In this conversation, Mary and Kate share how they zeroed in on the criminalization of queer people, a broad set of life or death issues to focus their campaigns. They talk about what they learned from their first anti criminalization campaign in Durham, North Carolina, which at first had dozens of demands. When that didn't gain as much traction as they wanted, they had to back up and rethink their plan. Later on in Atlanta, they applied those lessons to a different campaign by slowing down and more methodically using research, direct action, and court watching to figure out which policies and which decision makers were responsible for excessive fines and fees being levied on people who had misdemeanor charges. We'll hear about how they developed one tactic, bailouts, which simultaneously released people from jail and used the theory of show not tell to knock down the idea that incarceration creates public safety. And they describe how developing a tactic and scouting a local campaign are very different things. We'll hear about how they pivoted to use regional and national uprisings to absorb more people into their campaigns, and how their allegiance to a regional formation with many local chapters forced them to consider campaign demands that could be replicated across the South. And we'll hear about how they developed a regional campaign framework free from fear to support their chapters to launch local campaigns using bailouts. And we'll hear about how they helped end money bail in the city of Atlanta. Mary Hooks is a Black lesbian feminist mother and field secretary on the field team for the Movement for Black Lives. She's the former co-director of Southerners on New Ground, joining Song as a member in 2009 and beginning to organize with the organization in 2010. Kate Shapiro was born in Durham, North Carolina, and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, where she still lives with her daughter. She has had the great honor to work in the service of U.S. Southern freedom movements for gender, sexual, racial, and economic justice for the last 16 plus years. She's a grassroots organizer, trainer, popular educator, and strategist, and has worked at Women's March since 2020 and was on staff at Song in a variety of roles for the 8 years before that. Mary Hooks, Kate Shapiro, very glad to have you here talking Free from Fear campaigns in the South. Can you give us the trailer if this was a movie? What's this campaign about? What are we about to hear about?
You're about to hear about intrigue, lust, confrontation, glitter, longing, righteous rage, and anger. We will be talking today about the development of the Free from Fear campaigns at Southerners on New Ground, where we decided as a rowdy band of homosexuals in 2012 to actually build out a whole new apparatus inside of our regional organization so that we could actually, as Paulina Helm Hernandez likes to say, rip people's eyebrows off and beat them with it, specifically going after the architects, decision makers, and power holders that are creating policies and cultures that create hostility, death, devastation, and pain in our communities. So, we are going to be taking you through a little bit of our journey and its ups and downs of how we were able to do that from Little Rock to Nashville to Atlanta to Durham to Charleston. But we're going to be zooming in more specifically on the campaign in Atlanta, where we live and call home, but giving you a regional overlay so you can remember that our campaign work was much more than just Atlanta.
This sounds awesome. Since this was 10 years ago, it turns out this is pretty relevant for us in 2022. I can't wait to hear about why you think that is. What are the important lessons that we can draw today? But can you take us back 10 years? What's the story of this campaign and of y'all coming up with it?
This was before I came to Song, but Song had developed a 5 year strategy that included being able to build out the campaign arm inside of Song to confront power, to use direct action organizing, putting pressure on targets, et cetera, et cetera. And so some of that work began to be seeded circa around 2011-ish. Some raw stallions were brought on part-time to do some of that work and to expand our base in different states like Alabama and South Carolina, Virginia. And
You were a raw stallion.
yeah, I was a
Yeah.
raw stallion.
She was a
I
raw
was a raw
stallion 10
stallion.
years ago.
Did those shit,
Look
honey,
at her
in these
now.
streets, confused and thirsty to get free. The aim was to be able to see how can we leverage the infrastructure of the regional organization in order to get some concrete wins and material changes for our people, while also embodying and demonstrating what intersectional organizing looks like. Not just the identity politics stuff. That's whack. We can talk more about that. Free from Fear was the larger campaign vision. It was a vision for how, we were thinking about the South and wanting our people to live without fear, with dignity. And underneath it was the many different campaigns that folks were doing locally to address the concerns that was coming up through the community participatory research that we'd done as folks was putting their ear to the ground to see what was the issues that was deeply felt, that was widely felt. Yeah, so when we was talking to people, folks was like, I don't know about school, I done graduated, but I will tell you I'm struggling in public. Rather, that was a little homie, Chewy Garcia, right? Out of Durham, was killed at a skateboard park, and it had really energized and charged up a lot of people there. And other folks across the region was raising similar concerns, but like, where is public space? I feel policed in public space. We went to Charleston, and I remember even the queer clubs were like overly policed,
100%.
Like ridiculous. And so it became an issue that we got more clear as we began to walk the path around what it meant to explore this issue around criminalization.
We started with the banner of Beloved Community, and that was going to be our work around public education. And then, for all the reasons that Mary is laying out, we decided to focus more around criminalization under the banner of Free from Fear, right? having an aspirational banner under which to do our work, which we also learned from Not One More, as well as Black Lives Matter. And so the first campaign that we launched inside of the Free From Fear work was this campaign in Durham. And essentially, this is just to like show how kind of ignorant we were. We created this ordinance that had 49 demands in it, at least, right? We just took everything we'd ever seen before and we just smashed it together to make what we called the omnibus bill, including like prohibitions on racial profiling locally that had already been federally mandated. We didn't even like get the local versus federal. And coming from the South, where so many of the federal policies never have any impact on our lives, we were like, put it all in there. And then we ran it through some people, and everybody was like, this is irrelevant. These people don't decide this thing. And we had everything from standard operating procedures in there to
signatures for the police officer being able to search a vehicle. That ended up getting passed.
As did the SOP.
The SOPs were standard operating procedures on how to handle queer and transgender non-conforming folks.
And we also had stuff in there related to undocumented folks. We just packed it all in there. And then everybody was like, you can't go anywhere with this. And so then it got narrowed down so that we were able to squeak through some of those different demands through a city council in Durham. Also, Michael Brown was murdered.
It's 9th, 2014.
So we started our campaign, our Free From Fear campaign that you should talk about more, in the beginning of 2015, specifically looking at, we did a whole sort of dot voting process with our base because we hadn't done a bunch of work in Atlanta, specifically only a song before. This was us initiating work as song. We had done a ton of coalitional work around the Arizona copycat legislation in 2011, a whole bunch of work around Black liberation organizing, all sorts of different stuff. We never like initiated our own work because we wanted to make sure that we were driving resources to other parts of the region. But then we went through an internal dialogue and debate around if we can and should initiate work in Atlanta. And we decided that we were going to, specifically also because we felt like if we could move the dial in Atlanta, it could also open up other avenues in other parts of the region, though knowing also that we were working with a lot more resources, a much bigger base, and some different dynamics in a metropolis like Atlanta.
Okay, so just to summarize Act 1 a little bit, Song decides in 2011 to expand your base building work into a few new states. You bring on a few new organizers on staff who want to find issues you can run campaigns around that exemplify intersectional organizing, how that gets put into practice. That leads you all headfirst into a campaign to win a comprehensive anti-criminalization ordinance in Durham. It was like a wish list of all your possible demands. And you all figure out you've got to narrow it down, focus on just a few things. And eventually, the local coalition you all are part of wins new police standard operating procedures for how to engage with trans people and also new requirements for the police to get written consent to search people. And coming out of that, you all decide to initiate a local campaign in Atlanta, which was a big step for you all at the time. Can you take us through what you learned from that Durham process the previous year and how it also led you to rethink, oh, Song Atlanta is a place to dig in and let's try also a municipal fight there?
Yeah, I feel like we immediately started learning some good lessons with the Durham campaign. It was in motion and then Atlanta kicked off. But even in that emotion, what we learned as we immediately was getting feedback around the policy that it was like, yo, y'all doing the most. And so we knew that there needs to be some sort of scale back or there had to be a separate path for some of the different demands that was inside of this omnibus ordinance. Songs always saw itself positioned to be able to push more mainstream, mostly white-led LGBTQ organizations more left as it relates to racial economic justice. So when, here it is, the queers, in Durham saying, hey, we need these things to feel safe, to have dignity for our communities that we're a part of, to feel safe. And then Durham says, well, we just got an A+ rating from the HRC They say we good with the
We're the
gays.
best city for gays in the whole country.
You know what I mean? And so we were also like, what does that mean to set at those intersections, and particularly organizing inside of different sectors and different movements? It was an interesting thing to navigate. And so I think what we had to learn is that I remember there being phone calls with HRC be like, wait a minute, how are y'all judging this? Based on what? Oh, because y'all ain't considering race in this, huh? You want to be able to make sure that you can get married, or there's dog parks, whatever the fuck the white gay boys want. And so I think that also, I think helped us to really think about how we hold, the other sectors to the mat when we saw how they showed up around racial justice was lacking, for lack of better words.
But I think that that's also the point at which we started talking about quality of life versus life and death issues. Mm-hmm. And that a lot of the HRCs or some of the more mainstream, more elite organizations, be them gay or not, were often pushing around quality of life improvements. And where we were casting our lot was around life and death issues. And so really that allowed us to be able to distinguish and give shape and voice to a little bit more about where we were wanting to be and who we wanted to have on our team. I think the other thing, and I don't know if you would agree with this, Mary, but it's like, I think also in the Durham fight, we learned the hard way with that ordinance that like we need to do our research on targets and decision makers. And again, always, and we've learned this all the time, what's on paper is different than actually how power is brokered inside of our different municipalities and county decision making bodies. But that there's always a tendency to get real deep in the weeds on the research forever and not actually test in real time who's making the decisions, who are the influencers, etc. Because there's the research and then there's reality. And then the last thing that I think has been a long-standing lesson that we started to learn in Durham and that has carried us through was just like anything, like when you're learning something new, you can go real hard on it. But I think that where we sometimes struggled was like how to give them the visionary, the culture, the beauty of songs organizing has been so rooted in like kinship, belonging, fun, joy in the face of exile, harassment, etc. And so I think it's like we got a little square. So it was like, how do we make our campaigns and make our actions also demonstrate who we are and what our vision is versus just being like, oh, the right way to do this is like go to the meetings with the suits, right, and do what the lawyers tell us. Because lawyers always going to tell us that our ideas are not good enough, that they're not feasible, that they're not right, and that there's only a particular avenue through which change is made. And we know from history and from our own lives that that's just bullshit.
Cool. So can I test out then, see where we're at, summarizing a little bit of what you all learned or what you were also reacting to? Because I think for those who don't know, HRC is the Human Rights Campaign, DC organization, and you're saying that one of the dominant stories about gay people organizing in that moment is we're organizing for quality of life, dog parks, stuff like that, versus life or death issues that you all are bringing, being criminalized, we're being murdered. That's what's urgent for gay people to organize around, for queer people to organize around. And so try to create this ordinance that would protect queer people in really clear, specific ways. If you could name what some of the things were that you won in Durham that you took into the thinking and research and cutting the issue in Atlanta, in addition to all the other things you named about let's bring joy, let's bring ourselves, let's also narrow our focus when we start, if we start working in another place. Can you say some more of that as you get into the story, like from what you won in Durham into then what we did in Atlanta?
So by the time we get to January 2015, we had already been doing some sniffing around, what's the bleeding point?
We've been doing a bunch of organizing.
Oh, yeah. We had now August 9th, we hit the streets, okay? We was in this thing. And so a part of all the uprising energy had rolled out to Ferguson during October weekend. was given a mandate from the Ferguson comrades to say, and folks, it's clear, like, yo, it's going down where you live. You know it's horrible where you live. This isn't, Ferguson ain't special about this. So let's go turn up all over. And we were like, say less, because you're right. And so we came back, had like an affinity group of organizations that were doing all kind of actions. And then by the time January came, I remember us saying, comrades, we cannot continue to move like this. It is unprincipled for us to continue to mobilize, bring folk out, marching. Honey, we just be downtown, just mad without a demand, and a strategy. But can we at least get a demand, my friends? And so that's when we brought together our base and began to reflect some of the things that we were seeing, that we had initially started seeing as related to fines and fees. And it started too because it was what was happening in our own lives too, It was what was happening in our own lives. But it's interesting how, when something is so normalized, you just think that's the way it is. But then once you start looking at it from a systemic level, then you begin to see, oh, this is a setup. This is actually the booby traps. And so once we started doing that research, we did some dot voting, as Kate had mentioned before. Let's just go, find the one that actually is resonating with our people, again, widely felt, deeply felt. And so that's what
And that we can do something about.
And we could do something about.
There's a target and reach.
Mm-hmm. And so that's when we initially took up fines and fees. I remember Baby Dean at the time was also one of the song members at the time. And we were like, oh yeah, this fines and fees stuff is wild. And we were doing court watching as a way to also continue to beef up how we understood how it works. We had, I think, immediately incorporated the political education leadership development. Yeah.
We read a book about the history of Atlanta, The Condemnation of Little B,
We read
by Elaine Brown.
Yeah, we had political education embedded because we knew that couldn't just have this and we're not doing consciousness raising, building political alignment analysis, etc. So we read a few chapters of Condemnation of Little B, New Age Racism in America by Elaine Brown. And the first few chapters in it very specifically talks about the history of Atlanta. And we read Iron Fist,
Velvet Glove.
In the Velvet Glove. Woo! Oh my God. Like, yo, we was getting it in. Okay. And so we were court watching as a way to get a better understanding. And, part of a good campaign and a demand, the first thing you do is identify your target, then ask them for what you want. And I remember initially our demand was no fines and fees.
Fines and fees based on income, an end to all FTAs, failure to appear warrants. The automatic bench warrant that gets issued when folks fail to appear at court. And then mandatory use of a bench card for judges to determine indigency, and an expansion of dignified community service options. Because we had talked to folks that had been forced to wash cop cars as their community service. We were like, oh, hell no. I think that we added the bench card because we saw all the crazy shit in Court Watch where they'd be like, oh, you got a cell phone? You can pay this $700.
Yeah, that's how they were determining. They was just sizing people up like, oh yeah.
You got a new backpack for your kid? Using all of these arbitrary, insane things and then be like, oh yeah, you can pay this $1,000. Oh, you can't? Okay, you're gonna go sit in jail.
And so we're like, yo, let's go ask the target. And so while we're doing all this other stuff, still researching, court watching, we reach out to the chief judge, Chris Ward, at the time. And we say, yo, we want to meet him. And we reach out again, and homie don't respond. And so we escalate our tactics. And we had called all the other judges, and he had told them not to talk to us. And so we're like, okay, now we got to show you what these scrappy queers is willing to do. Then we started escalating. And at this point, too, we're also like broadening how we were engaging community. Remember, we did like that PM at a Hot and Bother town hall. We're just creating more openings for more folks to be able to engage in this conversation and really get a read of what was going on.
And forcing all of our base and ourselves to talk to people at court before, during, and after, which I think was really, really, really important. The other thing that was happening, though, at this point was we were also getting punted back and forth between city council, the local city judges, and the mayor. Where it was the same thing of like, no, we don't make the decision. The judges make the decision. There's no, we don't make the decision. The mayor makes the decision. Literally, everybody was telling us opposite things. They were just trying to play us.
It was getting played.
So then that's why we were also like, let's actually go after the judges and do a couple of actions to provoke a response. It will give us more data versus shuttling back and forth between all of these different offices. So we did a 2-part action because we think we're funny and we think we're smart. We had one of our members who's an artist build this huge, maybe 14-foot tall, we could find a picture, 14 foot tall canvas failure to appear ticket that looked just like the citation tickets that they issue here in the city. And we filled it out for Judge Ward. And so we had this whole huge ticket outside of the court while court was in session. There's lines around the block, people waiting to go in to have to go to court. We were just causing a whole scene about how Judge Ward had failed to appear to the people and that he worked for us and that we needed that meeting that we felt like we were owed. And so that was happening outside. We were causing a whole scene. We tried to get media. I think we got maybe one press hit. So we got a little bit of earned media with our visuals. And then we sent another band of rowdies into Judge Ward's actual courtroom.
Yeah. And so
that was Mary. Mary's on the rowdy side.
Yeah. So then we had like small little Judge Ward failed to appear little signs. We had rolled them up. And of course, we put glitter in them. We intentionally sat in the front of this courtroom so to say, all rise. We all stood up like everybody else. We opened up our posters. Glitter falls out, glitter bombing essentially. And then he kind of looks, he's like, what is this? This is a courtroom, not a street corner, blah, blah, blah. And kind of does like this chastising thing. And we kind of like answer the fucking phone. And we walk out, right? We're going back outside. He sends the bailiff after us. The judge wants to meet with you in his chambers. I think they have us sit in the little jury box area until he's ready. So creepy. And then we finally get to go back there and talk to dude. And the bailiff is telling us how he used to be a Black Panther and all this sort of stuff. Interesting. Another lesson I think is important is that folks who are working inside of the system, depending on how they situate themselves, they too can be organized, is what I'm saying. And not everybody should just be taken as, like, you're an enemy, you work for the state. We all are trying to work and shit under capitalism, whatever. So I remember the judge telling us, like, I can't change that law. My kids need boots and shoes. And just like really down, we got a chance to see what this cat was about and what he wasn't willing to do. And that's all we wanted, for him to be able to look us in the eye and tell us that he wasn't going to meet our demands. Great. Enough said, sir. So now we know we can escalate in good conscience. We recorded the whole thing too. We was good for recording meeting. So that's when it really like kicked off. And we continue with our court watching efforts. We continue to like listen in community hall, town halls, etc. And then I think the pivot to bail.
Yeah.
Now, what I believe happened, because we were going to the failure to appear, the different courtrooms, handle different sort of things. But we had, I think, slipped into or accidentally went into like first appearance, and we hadn't before.
Yeah.
And once we sat in there, I remember thinking, this is a different entry point. Because if we can address folks staying in jail because they can't afford their bail, they'll be less likely to cop out or take a plea deal or just pay the fine. If we intervene here, we don't even have to perhaps even deal with the fines and fees. So we're looking at it from a different intervention point or whatever. And I remember doing a lot of research around it. That's also around the time the Ferguson report dropped around their police department and that huge report. I think that was super helpful for us to look at, just seeing how they were looking at numbers, the magnitude and scale of, how people were profiting off of the ticketing, the bonds, the da 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 da, all the things. But it was sitting in court that we were like, yo, game changer. But I will say this too, though, particularly with the bond stuff, it's not as though I haven't been bailed out of jail before we get campaign stuff. Okay, I ain't talking in the blue sense, or like folks in our families. My Siobhan have been deeply impacted. All of this shit. But again, once you start seeing it, when it's not like the crisis normalized thing that you just do, and step into it from a different perspective, like it was a game changer. And I could just see it eyes wide open on a whole nother level. And I think at this point, because we had different tools to figure out we could do something about it versus just like the times the shit had happened and we've been mad.
But I think this is interesting. We had to remember our loyalties to a regional formation.
Mm.
And so I do think that also what was happening while we're chasing down Judge Ward, trying to do this court watching, beginning to build out our plan of attack in real time, right? We didn't make a perfect campaign plan and then execute it. We were like, let's try things, learn, and advance. But I think that also what was happening is we had, the folks in Richmond were working to prevent the expansion of a jail. Durham was doing a whole bunch of other organizing. We were doing organizing in Birmingham, but it was all under the broader umbrella of criminalization of Black, queer, and LGBTQ people, right? And so what was happening was that everybody was picking different issues, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But it meant that for us as campaign newbies, in some sense, trying to support all of these chapters or groups of members that were waging campaigns, they all had different targets. They all had different demands. So everybody was kind of like hunkered down in their own place. And so we were also like, what would it look like with this broader vision if we utilized, with Mary's vision, the bailouts to test a shared demand or a shared issue across the region so that we could better have people feel less isolated and more connected. We could leverage our power and we could leverage our lessons versus being like everybody's going after a different city manager versus council versus mayor versus judge, municipal judge, superior judge, all of that. State legislature.
2016, of course, Trump gets elected and everybody's like, what the fuck? So you did this regional like scan.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that we asked in a regional scan, similar to how folks was talking to people in community locally, we did a regional scan trying to identify what's the infrastructure, who got this. There was already a knowing that having that asshole in office, there was going to be some rollbacks and some institutions that was going to be impacted, whatever. But we raised a question around bail because we were like, the bail shit seems for real. And it seems like this happening everywhere. Let's see. And across the board, when we put out that regional scan and people responded, I don't believe there was one person who didn't say that they themselves or somebody that they knew had been impacted by bail where they lived at. Now, the system may have operated differently, et cetera, but generally everybody knew that this was a problem.
All right, let me pause you again and see if I can summarize where we are from the Durham omnibus campaign to rolling to support the comrades in Ferguson after Michael Brown was killed, to kicking off a campaign around fines and fees in Atlanta, to trying to figure out a regional campaign issue. And so first you all had figured out criminalization and policing were the burning point, as you put it, across your base, across the region. And that's how you got to an overall campaign banner, free from fear. And you all had learned a lot from the work in Durham about how to narrow down your demands and do actual testing at the beginning of figuring out a campaign to understand how power is actually wielded at the local level. First, you weren't sure about whether to invest organizational resources in launching a local campaign in Atlanta. But then in August 2014, after your time in Ferguson, you all get a push from them and you think it's time to build in Atlanta in a new way. And so in 2015, you start implementing some of what you all learned in Durham so that when you pick an issue, which in this case was unjust fines and fees being applied to people who miss their court dates in Metro Atlanta courtrooms, criminal courtrooms, you actually do direct actions on potential targets, like judges, to figure out if one such judge, in this case, is the person who can stop the fines and fees and also to understand how far you'll have to push him to do it. And at first, you all think, this is the campaign, fines and fees. But then you realize, wait a second, if people didn't have to be locked up in the first place because they can't afford bail, they're less likely to be forced to accept a plea deal with a prosecutor and then have to pay court fines and fees because they plead guilty. So, what if we went after bail? And what if we did that all over the South? And it wasn't a different campaign in every city, but we had campaigns against bail everywhere, a regional demand. That way, we could transfer what we learned a lot faster in more places rather than having to figure out the power map for a different issue in every place. That's starting to come together at the end of 2016 as you all prepare for your all member meeting in early 2017.
Fast forward January 2017, at our Song Regional membership meeting, we scrapped it out via debate. We like a good debate. We're trying to, build our muscle to debate. And so we debated and brought proposals around how we could unify around bail and melting ice. And melting ice, because that immigration work was something that we had been doing, and a lot of it, particularly in Georgia, with the leadership and support alongside of the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights, we were able to learn a lot from there too. And we knew that this shit was going to continue to increase, given that Trump and all of this, And so those were the two demands that we walked out with. And then I started the proposal around, hey, we should bail out Black mothers for Mother's Day. That's something Spirit put on my heart. And that was, I think, the turning point.
Because it was also about, we had learned from our own experience as well as from the data and the scans that bail was a shared issue across the region and across our constituency. But then we also were like, what if we actually use an action to further test, use a tactic, a shared tactic, distributed in a sense across the region to give us more information and to identify the entry points to actually advance campaigns locally, locally rooted but regionally connected.
Yeah.
And so the Black Mamas bailouts gave us also that opportunity to do something meaningful in real time that actually was going to alleviate suffering in real time, that was also going to foster joy and center a pro-Black and feminist and pro-queer politic, and was going to allow us to learn more about the opportunities to actually fight and win on that issue.
It was so much. It was so much that we learned. Yeah. So much that we wasn't ready for. So much we wasn't ready for. And this is where Divest Invest was also a framework that was moving inside a movement. And we were like, oh, we're very clear about, yes, divest from this bullshit and invest. We could literally say, coming out of bail, how many people needed beds in terms of to be able to get mental health or drugs treatment, how much housing people needed. It was clear where the gaps were. Yeah. And, and the resistance of these bastards not to want to do it. And so it certainly highlighted more targets, but I think it also got more people who was impacted by the issue involved.
Yep.
And, many of the folks, Song's membership in Atlanta, people had different relationships to the issue. So some, got up underneath it as advocates. Some got up underneath it because, I done dealt with this shit, But I think what we all were really clear about was that all of us had a shared interest and a shared desire, for us to be able to win this campaign regardless. We assembled a coalition locally, and then across the region, folks were like, we had voted at the regional meeting to do it. And so folks began to get information locally. But then because the actual tactic, there was so many mechanics of it, the fundraising that was involved, the actual people scanning their local communities to see what are the resources and what are the gaps, and all of the resources that are available, of course, through our lens. Are they pro-Black? Are they pro-feminist? Are they pro-immigrant? So calling up, shelters to say, do you accept XYZ type of people?
Getting clergy in the jails to talk to folks to see if they want to get bailed out, because some didn't.
Yeah. This was around the time too, did you ever get your minister's license?
No.
A few people in the region got our minister's license, honey. Just we're going to try to get in these jails and talk to our people. Even if crews weren't doing the actual tactic of bailout, Jay created that fundraising toolkit.
Yeah.
So folks were having house parties, and just regionally, you could just feel the energy, begin to shake and move, and people could make a meaningful contribution, whether they were doing an actual bailout or not. I think one of the most astounding things, just to see how folks were able to get in where they could fit in, and different ones will go to other places to support their bailouts, whatever. And one of the things that I think is important, we had made a commitment to that when we bailed people out, that we also wanted to, we bring our full selves to the work as our scrappy, ridiculous selves. So we pretty much took over the Fulton County Jail. Okay. We had our whole shit out there. It was cute, tables, snacks. We had our banners, you know what I mean? We had music and flowers and, the generosity of spirit that folks across community, that organizations, one of the organizations made little badges for everybody. Sister Care Alliance. We have worked with other orgs we had never worked with before. Some came with some hard lessons, but it helped strengthen our muscles to be in coalition. And I'd always trying to organize with people who think like you and talk like you. We literally took over the jail, the energy of the jail. We were traversing rules. I think the officers themselves were surprised. And even, they had started giving folks care bags and stuff. We're like, y'all don't be doing that shit. But they rose to the occasion. When they saw how we moved, they tapped into their own humanity. And we had moments, and even some folks who would help us later on through the course of the work, who we could call upon to get information, from an inside perspective. And so, yeah, I think there was something about the way in which we also, through the process of the bailouts, we remained true to who we were. And also then the big homecoming and the barbecue outside. It was like, I want to bring real dishes, want nobody eat no styrofoam.
Yep.
And just again, a generosity of spirit, and folks who hadn't done or been to a thing like that had just shown up because it was very concrete, real tangible.
The other thing that's interesting about the bailouts, everything that Mary said, so many different sets of communities were activated around this action because of all the reasons Mary said, but so many more folks got activated around it. But a lot of places weren't able to move that into campaigns, which is often the issue with mobilizations or tactics or what have you, is you're like, free Palestine or whatever it is, end the war, whatever your demonstration is that you do, your action, and then you can't move that into a campaign. And so that was also the case with a lot of the different places. And that's okay. But just to say that was one of the realities that we were also contending with. We live in a sort of a turn up and a mobilization and an activist culture, and organizing has moments of that, and moments of actions that are visible that you can wrap your arms around and that are beautiful, like the bailouts and tactics like that. But a lot of it is like, carrying the water to sustain work and people and teams and momentum and vision over time. And so just to say that was, I think, an interesting other place where some folks made the journey with us, some folks didn't make the journey with us. But I do think it was also the right call and made the journey more possible when we were like, we're all doing the same thing. And sometimes that doesn't make sense because it comes from DC and it's an action in a box and it's like, everybody do the same thing. Whatever. But this was a different process around doing the same thing and, testing beforehand and listening beforehand that allowed it to have a little bit more resonance and depth. I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds on it, but one of the things that I encouraged and requested from the different members, for those of us that were white, around the bailouts and money bail work and the free from fear work broadly, was giving people the mandate to practice the articulation around stake and the opportunity to practice to say, hey, I actually have never, I got bailed out by my daddy. Or that's not an issue that's necessarily affected me, but it's affected my loved ones in this XYZ sort of way. And to also be able to articulate what it will mean for all of us individually from our own identity and experience, if and when we can make these changes. and the shared destiny, the shared possibility, and the power that that's going to give all of us. So I think that that's one of the things too, is just like giving people the chance to practice versus being like, talk like Mary Hooks. Or because you do or don't have a relationship to this issue, you can't organize around it. It's like, no, it's actually about, can you be authentic and reflective around your own identity and experience and position and be able to connect the dots? Not in an over justify your position and run your mouth and take up all the space, but in a way where people know and they can tell from your posture and your cadence that you don't feel like an imposter, and that we know inside of song that no liberation is going to come about by one community organizing. It's going to take so many more of us, and that that's continually an area where we need to step further into our intersectional politics, and it's a place where we have a lot of gaps, specifically also in this political moment where there's a lot of questions around legitimacy and who can and cannot speak or act.
Thank you for all that. As we move into the lessons that you all want to offer for us in 2022, that you see as you read the room here, read our movement landscape, our turn up culture versus campaign culture, and you obviously have already offered some of that, or at least teasers for what you think we need to do more of or less of in this time. Just to wrap up the story of what happened, what you were talking about was the City of Atlanta campaign around ending cash bail. Wrapping up the story of, so 2017, you start this tactic, this bailouts, both as scouting, both as building our muscles organizationally across the region, also a regional demand around ending cash bail, which went, I think, national, transcended the region, transcended outside of queer anti-criminalization organizing, influenced a whole lot of us in other places and parts of movement sectors. But if you could just land both of those plans and also give our listeners who might not know how many places ended up doing bailouts, how it's actually still a thing that happens on Mother's Day. But I'm curious about those as you get into, and then what does this mean for us in 2022?
Inside of song, we like, yeah, bailouts. We're gonna try some shit. Let's do this tactic. Then we were also in a meeting. Song had been engaged inside of the movement for Black Lives that had started to emerge in 2014. To be able to connect what was happening with all the uprisings, and beg the question, what can we do that we can't do alone? So InfraBL, Color of Change had come together and held a bail convening. There was actually a convening around folks across the country who were doing work around bail. InfraBL had just was in a process of writing the Vision for Black Lives policy platform. So the different organizations like Song and BYP and Freedom Inc., all of these organizations was saying, hey, this is what we're fighting for locally. And we had also harvested a lot of that information from the Cleveland convening in 2015. They brought folks together who was doing bail work. InfraBL, Color Change, whatever, bail convening, folks say, yes, we're going to do bailouts as a coalition, which was also some of the initial seeds of the National Bailout Collective. But folks began to draft a transformative bail curriculum. So that became an offering across the country for folks to help politicize people around bail through an abolitionist lens. And then the national infrastructure began to emerge, the National Bailout Collective, to help Black-led organizations who wanted to engage in bailouts, raise money collectively and be able to move it across the country, and to also help folks shape radical demands around it, see what if there was some federal moves we could make around it. I can't tell you how many people engaged in doing bailout work. People still do bailouts. We've had folks from other countries who are like, we trying to bail out our people. What was clear and what was spiritually clear was like, Black people, we know we've done this before. We've bought each other's freedom before. There's something in that. And this was also in a time Trump get in office, folks is trying to figure out, how do I contribute? And this, just opened up a huge container for people to be able to pour in and get it in.
Like a whole organization that's still is staffed.
Whole another organization that grew out of it. And more bail funds begin to emerge. There's always been bail funds since like the 70s, right? And I think that The National Bail Fund Network also saw an increase in the amount of bail funds. And as it relates to Atlanta, going back and zooming into Atlanta, election year, January 2018, Keisha Lance Bottom gets in office, and she's like, "My first 100 days, I'm going to end bail." We like this little asshole. She ain't never really fucked with us
Yeah,
before.
she'd been our NEMI
Yeah,
on council.
yeah, been whack. And but she has some promises to fulfill, or else Mary Norwood, the conservative, would have won.
But she had already forecasted that she was willing to look at bail. I think specifically because of the bailouts and some of the national climate
Yeah.
that we had had our little hands in helping advance the issues.
Once she announced that, that's when we really got like dug in deeper with our partners at Southern Center for Human Rights, SCHR, who was helping to draft bill. And that's when we were getting
Yeah.
some of they're not going to allow this happen. They're not going to pass this. So we hit up Law for Black Lives, our comrades nationally with Marbury, and them like, yo, we need our own ordinance because we don't know how to write that shit. We don't know how to write policy. And we were like, and this is what we think it should include. And so we brought ours to the table. They brought theirs. And then they were like, we'll see how far we could take that. And ultimately, we didn't get everything we want. That's God, I hate the way those stories end. But that's the name of this bitch ass game.
Yeah.
But I think some of the things about it was that it made impacts once they started implementing it. Easily about a year later, what had averaged had been like 700 some people a day in the jail was reduced to like 50, 40 a day.
Yeah.
And so Women on the Rise had been saying for years they need to close that damn jail, they need to close the jail. And so once the bail legislation passed, and we're all over here like tired of shit, like fuck. And then boom, that's when the comrades from Women on the Rise, like, no problem. And then they begin to, reassemble and recharge the city with it's time to close the jail.
Because it's empty.
Because it's motherfucking empty. And so business from these cats, it was financially even more responsible, whatever. And that continues to be an ongoing fight. You see the ebbs and flows that happen around that.
I think that there's something that's so interesting here for those of us that are on Team Justice and on Team Campaign and keep it scrappy, keep it visionary, and like go big or go home. Is just that, to be real, one of the things that happened is that we got outpaced. We got outpaced by the individual activists and the individual lawyer activists and the advocates. And so they essentially were like, y'all cute, you do the like protests, but we're going to write the policy. We got a beautiful policy, but we were too late because they'd already written it and gone back and forth and redlined it with the lawyers. And so they were like, haha, yeah, we'll add section 13. And they did. They added a section 13 that was specifically about advancing some type of task force to do the research around the stabilization and support. And then we got them to change some other language, but they were like eating dessert and we were like brought our appetizer. Like we were just behind. So there is a question coalitionally, tactically, and organizing wise. You want to respond to the targets in real time, especially when they sometimes intentionally try to accelerate the process to see if you can keep up. But there is that sort of dance around like, how do you stay with the process, but also try to slow it down so that actually the people impacted can be part of it and not get too psyched out by all of the damn lawyers and advocates being like, not possible. You're going to ruin it for all of us. They're going to close their door in our face and we're not going to get anything. Be moderate, be reasonable, be logical. And so that is one of my other bigger reflections from that period. When you got a big team as a base building organization and a lot of folks can't respond immediately, how do you elbow out enough space amongst the suits to be able to have it be meaningful and align with our values, frankly? And also not do the other lefty thing, which is like, if it's not going to be perfect how we want it, we don't want any of it. the pendulum swings in the other direction. We're like, we don't want any of it. There's truth in the fact that we do have to compromise sometimes, but that's a tension that we still face right now in major ways.
I think if we hadn't been coming with appetizers and could have been on dessert round 2, it would have put us in a different position
100%.
to be able to negotiate, to compromise whatevs versus like, fuck.
But they don't slow their process for us.
Not
That's
at
the
all.
whole thing with the lawyers. They're going to do it their way. So it's
Yeah.
like, how do you have influence over them internally to be able to align more closely with the base building organizations versus being pigeonholed? We shifted the conversation profoundly in those council meetings by who we brought and who we held space for versus it just being the lawyers and then the random people that always talk at every city council meeting for the last 40 years.
So, as you all move into the larger lessons learned from this period, wrapping up the story about the bail campaign in Atlanta, sounds like the bailouts you all started in 2017. There were 2 in Atlanta that year, in addition to 6 other cities where Song had chapters, had organizers, had people on the ground. But so those 2 bailouts so influenced the local political landscape in Atlanta that Keisha Lance Bottoms, immediately upon taking office in 2018, says, I'm going to end bail in my first 100 days. Actually, yeah, so at the beginning of 2019, she says that. And then you all have to scramble to make sure that the ordinance or the policy is strong enough. And there's a real tension between doing that well and being scrappy, as you all put it, playing a different rebel role. And I'm really curious about what you all think from your position about where we're at. This isn't just about 10 years ago. You're telling the story from then, but what do you think we need more of or less of today in our movement organizing if we're talking about how to build powerful campaigns?
So one of the things that I think was super important in this campaign, and what this campaign demonstrated, and many of the Free from Fear campaigns, was that, people love talking about intersectionality. And some of the elders had already put us on game, years ago to be like, some people just want to talk about intersectionality because I just give them more identity badges, right? And they can feel like the most whatever person in the room. And many of us understand intersectionality as, yes, we do understand our lives are connected, our destinies are connected, et cetera, et cetera. And systems of oppression are connected, right? And so part of our campaigns and our work is to be able to draw those connections, to be able to have more sophisticated campaign strategies, be able to see what it means for, remember we were like trying to hem up the Sodexo folks who were serving food in the county jail, really being able to get more sophisticated in terms of how we navigate trying to get wins for our people. And it means being able to bring in communities across age, across race, across class, to be able to, like you were saying, get some stake in the game and to be able to actually take on stuff that's going to impact all of our communities across the board. And I think that this campaign demonstrated how we actually practice an intersectional approach in doing organizing work.
And that doesn't mean like one size fits all. Everybody's got different talking points and everybody's got different roles. And there's enough roles for everyone. And everybody has an opportunity to contribute and to be transformed in the doing together. I have 2 more. So one, I think, and we learned this also from Mi Gente. It was not one more campaign, but I still think about it, which is like, make it a street fight. The most powerful points of these different campaigns and the development of the campaigns was when we were able to do it on our terms and make it a street fight in the street versus going in with the suits and being like, am I the only person not wearing pantyhose? The reason why we make it a street fight is, one, it makes it public, right? Because they hide, they're cowards. They want to hide in these buildings where nobody can find them and make the policies that ruin so many of our people's lives. And 2, so it makes it visible and makes it public, and it sort of evens the terrain. And it also gives us like with the bailouts or with the failure to appear, an opportunity to use humor and to show, not tell our vision. We had this action that we never did that we'll one day do when we're old and gray or grayer, which was around a visionary court action. And this was Mary's idea. And she wanted to do a visionary court action outside of the municipal court while the hundreds of people are waiting to go into court. It was going to be like a damn lounge with some hookah. Who knows? Comfortable couches, plants.
We wanted to make a big gavel, and we wanted people to be able to this is what it means to use a bench card. You come up and say, hey, I ain't got no money. And it's like, okay, cool. But guess what? The community garden, they need some extra hands. Bless up. We even,
Yep.
And really wanted just to, as the Black Panthers would call it, the prefigurative organizing.
And I think that that's one too, is make it a street fight, both for the confrontation, but also for the vision. I think that we're so starved. It's like we're in the desert. We're in an imagination desert right now. Whatever beautiful ideas we have, however weird they are, if people want to try to make them happen in terms of their tactics and action, just do it. Do it. You're going to spark a sense of possibility in somebody, whether you know them or not, whether they tell you or not. That is the beauty of organizing, and not to expect that everybody that's been impacted is going to know your name or know you, or that you're ever going to know them. But it is about, how do we broadcast a sense of possibility in a desert in a lot of ways that we're living in, and that we're vulnerable when it's only on their terms. When all of our negotiations or confrontations are in their offices or on their terms, it brings up our vulnerabilities. But then the other thing too that it makes me think about is, pick something and try. It doesn't have to be the perfect issue. It shouldn't just be one thing that you and your one friend think is important. You do need to explore and build. With our rising political fundamentalism, we also have a rising sense of hesitancy and perfectionism. It's got to be the perfect issue, or how does, we can't pick one because then we're going to be throwing somebody under the bus, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, just try. The learning is going to be in the doing, the trying, and you're going to be changed and others are going to be changed, even if you don't quote unquote win. Because we so often at Song also used to talk about culture change and policy change.
Yeah.
And that we actually need both. We can't do one without the other. So whatever problem or issue keeps bubbling up, pay attention to that, and throw some shit at it and see what sticks, and know that it's gonna not go as planned on your paper. But you learn, and then you adapt, and then you try something else.
And one thing too that we kept failing at, we didn't do a good job. But I think where we were part of a vision was we'd bail people out, we'd bring homecoming, and then we'd be able to hold a massive mobilization after the bailout and confronting our enemies. And I think we were never able to leverage that energy and harness that energy. One, because we were drenched in doing a lot of direct service, a lot of support in that way, and people were generally chapped out. But I think what we were also too, because we were developing and moving these campaigns when there was so much uprising happening. Rapid Response 2016, it was mad rapid response. Having a good campaign plan, again, not perfect, but just some sense of these are our next few steps over some time. People being able to say, don't lose the campaign just because the shit popping off, but give people a long-term fight that they can engage in. And how you show up in uprising moments is an opportunity to absorb people into campaign work. And sometimes people just drop it, say they're irrelevant, but deepen your analysis. What is it about the campaign you moving that resonates or connects to what folks are upset about in this uprising moment, and see if it's opportunity to move people into that instead of just dropping it and letting it go to the side. Because I feel like that's also too where we don't really get to leverage a lot of that momentum into long-term sustained fights when we've already figured out the path forward as much as we can, but not inviting others to be a part of that in those moments of uprising. And if your plan was 4 months, you had a 4-month plan, now you got thousands of people in the street, that 4-month plan can be done in 1 month, escalating the timeline. and making sure you have enough entry points for people to throw down and be able to contribute to it.
You know what that makes me think about is if you're building community, you're not necessarily gonna build a campaign. But if you're building a campaign, you're
Mhm.
definitively gonna build more community, and we need more community. We need more kinship. We need more ties between us. But I do think that sometimes we've forsaken, quote unquote, like community building and not pursued campaigns in the last couple of years. Like they've sort of like gone out of style in some circles in favor of community. And I'm like, where did we go wrong where people think that you're not going to build lifelong relationships through campaigns? Because then you get to do a whole bunch and learn a whole bunch of different things together. There's something in there for me where we've gotten a little twisty on the community building over campaign building. And I'm like, no, no, no. If we do campaigns, we get both.
Now that's a whole nother layer of conversation we got, because I certainly have some thoughts about it. I think that oftentimes when folks just get narrowed in a community build outside a campaign, it doesn't encourage you to build community across other communities. You tend to just build with folks who sound like you and talk like, in a campaign, cut that issue right, baby, everybody can get this work. Everybody can get a piece. When you find yourself being able to rock with other people, where we saw after this last election season and the Rona, which made sense, a lot of people pivoting. And I hope people ain't conflating community building with mutual aid, though those 2 things can be vibing and working together. A good campaign is also going to be considering how do you meet people's needs in the moment. I think the bailout was a way to demonstrate that. But as we see more people engaging in mutual aid, um, but inviting people to confront the enemies who are causing the suffering, who are, causing the poverty, causing the reason why people ain't got XYZ. That's also the missing element and link too, is that. And not saying that every organization has to be running all the multitude of strategies, but again, being able to do it in coalition work, alliances, as Brie loves, like teams of the willing, but like it's going to take more organizations, doing shit together and being powerful together, begging this question that Infobia talks about, what we can do together that we can't do alone. That's actually going to help us to do all is. It's a lot that's required and necessary in order to win some shit for our people. And none of it is a waste, but it needs to be deeper, more coordination, and held together with a lot more vision, values, and something else.
Stamina.
And stamina.
Just thinking about any of the organizers you're in community with, 2022, is there one other insight or offering, or us on the left who are trying to build power, that you want to make that you haven't gotten a chance to say? Or even if it's like, everybody should read this, everyone should listen to this song, everyone should blank, that could be the offering. It doesn't just have to be like the 5 most important points.
Okay, so there's a few. Everybody is needing curriculum stuff. So check out We Don't All Want to Be Stars. Auburn Seminary held the project, but that Shapiro and a bunch of song fam and movement fam contributed, and Kate was the one that actually pulled it together. Emily Simons did the design on it. It's beautiful, but it really is about building power through a feminist lens. A community and campaign talking about healing is so good. It can be found online for free. I'm a part of Black Organizers for Leadership and Dignity, and had been in a few weeks talking about how to develop good strategy. And I think one of the ones that really stands out was really thinking about how do we overwhelming obstacles, selections from the Introduction to Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rumlett. Not necessarily somebody that I have lined up on my bookcase, but I think there was some interesting points that he was making. And what does it mean to be the underdog in the fight? And how do you really identify where you have a decisive advantage over this bigger enemy? And I think movement has to grapple with that. And I feel like, we can, I feel like we've been able to tap in a little bit. We've been able to tap in around how do we bring a decisive advantage inside of an electoral fight. That's cool. And we need to also find that and develop that in other ways that we bring in and giving the smoke to our enemies, and also a way in which we're embodying and building the other world building that we know that is required. And so I think that that's also something too. This is also a time where people are like, narrative. People want to say. If we just say it better, if we just sharpen how we say it and all this sort of thing. But I'm like, our people want us to talk with our feet, and people want to feel it and be moved by it, and beyond what we say, beyond what we say. And I know it's a critical, but I don't want folks to forsake organizing and what it means to just talk to everyday people about the shits. And of course, we should be using that to help inform how we talk about our issues more broadly together and our visions more broadly together. But we're not going to get it if we don't talk to our people, everyday people, because that's who gives us the language. That's who gives us the ways in which we culturally talk to our different communities about the things that we're trying to win.
Mary Hooks, Kate Shapiro, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks so much.
The Craft of Campaigns podcast is a project of the Organizing Skills Institute at Training for Change and made possible by grassroots donors. Visit Training for Change for workshops, training tools, and other resources. We welcome your feedback and nominations for other campaigns that should be featured on this podcast. If you like these episodes, please consider donating to keep the show running. This podcast is produced by Ali Roseberry Polier. I'm Andrew Willis Garces. See you next time.